Ladies and gentlemen, this is I mean, you're saying to yourself, well, we just heard from Dr. Ron Paul. I mean, anything else after that's going to be like, you know, no. We continue at a very high level of performance here at the Oakland County Campaign for Liberty, as you all know from previous meetings. And we now have with us the great Mike Maharrey, who is the Communications Director of the 10th Amendment Center. He is also the leader of a group called We See You Watching Lexington. Now, we discussed with Dr. Paul about nullification, that came up. And the 10th Amendment Center, which I think started back in 2006, doing this, and it was like in somebody's apartment, Michael Bolden's apartment probably, I'm guessing. They are a group that punches above their weight. And if you've seen the videos, or heard the speeches, or read the articles, or even seen the memes that the 10th Amendment Center puts out, both here at the local level in Michigan, but also over the entire federal union, they're unsurpassed. And Mike Maharrey has done wonderful work. He's talked about how the people fought for freedom using state nullification to fight against slavery, how they use it to fight against attacks on freedom of speech, how it's being used to fight against substance choice, as it was done during the alcohol prohibition era even. And of course, there are all sorts of different things. And one of the areas, the NDA indefinite detention was one, but also surveillance and privacy. When there was warrantless surveillance at any level of government, but particularly when the feds are involved, that's particularly pernicious, and they have all, and the same thing like with civil asset forfeiture too. The feds and the state government and the local government sometimes get together and they do conspire against us, and there's a lot of reasons for that benefit them and hurt us. Well, Mike is not only doing the work at the 10th Amendment Center, but as the leader of We See You Watching Lexington, he and his friends, Clay Davis and a couple of other very fine folks, are providing a living laboratory of how to do local activism right. And so what happened was, and he'll tell you the story, but he wanted to find out about the spy pole and the cameras that were looking at everybody's backyards. So he said, hey, what's going on? They went to the city government, and this one council member was a real smarmy and arrogant kind of guy that didn't know very much. I know that will shock all of you to hear that. He then issued a Freedom of Information Act request to find out just what were these cameras about and who authorized them and what's all involved in this. And they didn't want to answer, but apparently the Attorney General of the state said they had to do it. They sent him all these documents, heavily redacted. He did a meme about it. He said, oh, if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to hide. And he held up this document, and there was almost nothing that wasn't blacked out. So they say, well, at least he's making some progress. Then they sued him. And the reason for the suit was to intimidate, put an onus of expense and time thing. And Mike says, we're not backing down. We are not backing down. And they haven't backed down. They got the ACLU involved. And there are a lot of different issues to talk about, but here we now have somebody who is on the front lines of local activism against the totalitarian state. And ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for my friend and yours and a friend of liberty, Mike Maharrey.
I don't know about going after Ron Paul, because this is how this is going to play out. You're gonna say, I went to this really cool meeting and Ron Paul spoke and then some dude was after him. That's what's gonna happen. But I'm all right with that. I just want to share a little bit about local activism and how effective and important local activism can be. And as Dennis said, I'm the National Communications Director at the 10th Amendment Center. I've been working there for about 6 years now. And you know, obviously our focus has been primarily on state efforts to undermine federal power, using nullification, refusal to cooperate with the federal government as a way to decentralize and devolve power back to the state and local governments where it belongs. And one of the major policy issues that I've been involved in over the last 3 years or so is surveillance. And you guys might remember back a few years ago, we launched an initiative to shut the water down at the NSA facility in Bloodfield, Utah. And that was kind of our first foray into this issue of surveillance. So over the last couple of years, we have become increasingly aware that what is evolving in the United States when it comes to policing is effectively a national police force. The federal government is dictating local policing priorities. They're doing this through primarily the war on drugs, to a lesser degree the war on terror. And so you're starting to see this militarization of police. You're starting to see more and more focus on drug interdiction, less and less focus on actual property crime and violent crimes. You're seeing a lower prosecution rate for murders and rapes and those types of things as resources and personnel are being directed toward the war on drugs. And what we've also seen evolving is what I like to call the national surveillance state. I don't like to call it that, but that's what it is. And what the federal government's doing is it's providing millions and millions and billions of dollars to local governments so that they can buy surveillance equipment. They set up these things like stingray devices, surveillance cameras, license plate readers, and then they create these information sharing agreements and partnerships. So all of this information that is being gathered at the local level ends up getting dumped in these giant databases and becoming part of the national surveillance web. For a specific example, we know for a fact that the DEA is developing a license plate database where it can track license plate numbers wherever they go. It uses local data to feed into these systems. So what we've discovered is that by limiting surveillance at the local level, you're also effectively eliminating surveillance at the national level. Take something like this license plate reader system. If there is no data, then it can't be dumped into a federal database. So if there are limits placed on what your local police can do as far as information gathering, information sharing, then that actually hinders the federal surveillance state. So we've really been focusing on these local efforts over the last couple of years. And we've entered into a pretty strong partnership with the folks at the ACLU and other organizations that are privacy concerned. And there's an initiative that's going on across the United States called the COPS Initiative. And it's basically a local ordinance that limits the ability of state, local, or local police departments to get surveillance equipment without oversight and without any transparency. So like I said, a lot of this money comes from the federal government. Police departments can actually get very intrusive surveillance equipment, and city government may not even know about it. They're using money they're getting from these grants. It's off the books, so to speak. All of a sudden, they're using stingray devices and license plate readers and all of these crazy things. And there's no oversight, there's no transparency, there's no plan, there's no restrictions on how information is shared and handled. So as you can imagine, this becomes extremely subject to abuse. For instance, in Pinellas County, Florida, there was a guy, a guy was married, got divorced, it became a contentious custody battle, and she started dating a sheriff's deputy. All of a sudden, wow, he's using sheriff department resources to track this guy. They're, filing false charges. There's all this horrible stuff that happened to this guy because there was no parameters around the use of surveillance equipment. So our main goal is to see transparency and accountability and oversight when it comes to surveillance at the local level. So we've been kind of pushing this for the last year and a half through the 10th Amendment Center, working with the ACLU. We've seen these ordinances introduced in about a dozen cities, passed in several, and it's just a really good initiative that takes care of privacy in your own backyard and then also helps in at least a small way to hinder the national surveillance state. So it's a great program. And I've been kind of coordinating this kind of at the national level, doing some press stuff and helping with drafting legislation and that kind of thing. But over the summer, this got really personal for me. There's a park that's about a mile and a half, or not even a mile and a half, it's about a mile from my house. My wife and I like to walk through this park. It's a skateboard park, and it's got a nice little walking trail. And about, I guess, June, they put up a utility pole next to the skateboard, the nice concrete pit. And so we thought, oh, cool, they're going to put up lights so the kids can skateboard at night. Well, no, that's not what happened at all. In July, we were walking through there, and we looked up, and there was an array of 4 surveillance cameras perched on top of this pole. And I was like, oh boy, not good. And I knew that this was just the tip of the iceberg. Really, in the big picture, some cameras in a park, maybe not that big a deal. Although I do have a problem with the fact that, as I've come to find out, there's no restrictions on how this information is shared or who can access the cameras, but that's a whole other issue. But I saw these and I thought, this is the tip of the iceberg. What other surveillance programs are being operated here in my own town? I've been talking about this at the national level. I've been doing this for the 10th Amendment Center, but this is in my own backyard. I recognize there's a problem here. I have some responsibility to get involved. And that was the point that I formed this little grassroots organization called We See You Watching Lexington. And you can find us at WeSeeYouWatchingLexington.com. And all it is a very loose coalition of activists and people concerned about privacy that are pushing for one of these ordinances to be introduced in the city of Lexington. We want oversight and transparency for surveillance, something that hardly anybody could possibly disagree with, you would think. But in the process of trying to find out what is the police department doing, I started doing open records requests, as Dennis mentioned, and I came to find out that the Lexington Police Department operates 29 mobile surveillance cameras. Now, when I say 29 mobile surveillance cameras, you're probably asking, well, Mike, what is a mobile surveillance camera? And my answer to you is I have no idea, because the police department won't tell me. This is a huge secret. And like Dennis said, I got some redacted documents, and I got a lawsuit for asking the question. The city of Lexington is actually suing me because they lost their appeal to the on this open records request, and the state attorney general said they need to give me these documents. They need to tell me what mobile surveillance cameras are. But instead of just doing what the attorney general, part of the state, said they should do, they sued me personally. And for a lot of people, for me, it was a problem. You can imagine, I'm sitting here at home. I had just come back from a long trip. I was sitting with my wife. We're watching TV. Bang, bang, bang. There's a knock on the door. I'm expecting my stepdaughter. I open the door, and there's a constable standing there. Is Mike Maharrey here? I'm looking, I don't really want him to be. And he served me with papers. And the first thing that went through my head was, how much is this going to cost me? And that's exactly what they wanted to go through my head. That's really what this whole lawsuit business is about. It's about intimidating and bullying and getting people to back down. They figured they could sue me. I wouldn't have the resources to hire a lawyer and pursue this in court, and I would just drop it, and then they could keep their surveillance program hidden. Fortunately for me, I had some resources. I had my connections with the ACLU. I have a little background in activism. So I started reaching out to people and was able to secure representation from the ACLU in order to fight this lawsuit. But if it weren't for that, I would be in a position where I would be having to spend a whole lot of money that I don't have. I don't know about you guys, but I don't have deep pockets. And that's the whole idea. And it's really interesting. Some of you guys might have seen it because it went around pretty heavily on social media. There was an AP article, I guess about a month and a half ago, that was talking about how local governments are getting more and more aggressive about suing people over open records requests. I actually read this, and I turned to my wife and I said, wonder if I'm about to get sued. So, it was almost prophetic. But the big picture is they picked the wrong guy. And it's really kind of ironic that they dumped a spy pole in my neighborhood. And Dennis mentioned Clay Davis. He's one of my partners in crime. He's handling all of our community outreach, and Clay also lives in this neighborhood, and he's been a long time activist in the realm of marijuana. So he knows how to do the activism thing too. And so we're continuing to push forward on this. And the fun thing about it is, you get sued, and that's kind of not good news personally, but it makes for great media. So I spent all last week when we sent out a press release letting everybody know that the ACLU is going to be representing me in this suit. I ended up doing 2 local news channels, front page of the local newspaper, 2 of the biggest local radio shows. So now, all of a sudden, people in Lexington are talking about surveillance, something that nobody had given second thought to. And so that's pretty exciting. If nothing else, we've created a conversation. But we obviously intend to push this even further. And we plan on winning this lawsuit. We plan on getting these documents and finding out what the Lexington Police Department is hiding. And more importantly, we plan on using this as a platform to get this ordinance introduced that will require any local government agency to get a surveillance plan put together before they obtain any new surveillance equipment. And this will also apply to old surveillance equipment. They'll have to create a plan that will outline how it's going to be used, what are the costs involved, how are they going to protect privacy? How are they going to ensure it's not being used only in minority communities? How are they going to handle data sharing? How are they going to handle this information? All of that stuff will have to be outlined up front, and then it will have to be presented in a public hearing where the public can weigh in, and then it will have to be approved by the city council. Now, obviously, that doesn't guarantee that we won't have surveillance equipment, but at least it will create that first level of transparency, that first level of oversight, and it will give us a platform where we can push back against the more intrusive surveillance equipment. So we're going to use this lawsuit as an opportunity to push this and get this ordinance introduced and passed here in Lexington. So that's kind of what's going on. It's kind of an interesting story, but I want to spin it into something that I think is more significant and more important. And that's the fact that anybody can do local activism. I'm not special. Well, I am special. I mean, obviously, I'm right after Ron Paul, right? So I'm a little bit special. No, I'm not special. I don't have any, superpowers that allow me to do local activism that you guys out there don't have. Now, I do have a certain set of skills. I have a journalism background. I know how to handle media. I'm a good writer. I do have those skills. But I'm not good at a lot of things. I'm really not good at organizing events or organizing people. But I've got Clay to do that. I've got other people involved. All activism takes is a person that's willing to find a problem and say, I'm going to figure out a way to address this. And that's the first step. The Homeland Security, they like to say, see something, say something, which is creepy to me. But that's kind of the attitude I took. I saw something, spy camera in my neighborhood, and I said something. And I got some people interested, and I got some people involved, and I created a coalition. It is so easy to organize people with social media. We have these wonderful tools that are at our disposal today. When I saw those cameras, within about 2 days, I had put together a little Facebook group. I call it Big Brother is Watching Lexington. It's a closed group. I invited people in the area that I knew that might care about surveillance and might be interested in activism. And now I've got a core of about 50 people that I can reach out to privately to organize things and to get things done. So we were able to create a coalition really without even having to go out. I mean, I just put something on Facebook. So we have these wonderful tools at our disposal. What we lack, excuse me, are people that are willing to step forward and do something. And people will ask me all the time, people that are interested in liberty, they'll say, hey, what can I do? Well, this is what you can do. There are things in your community, in your county, in your city that the government is doing that are intrusive and that are infringing on your liberties, that you can take steps right now within the next 2 to 3 weeks to begin to address, raise awareness, and fight those things. And it's interesting, we talk about this a lot at the 10th Amendment Center. John Dickinson was known as the penman of the Revolution. And he wrote what are now known as the, gosh, now I can't remember the name of the stupid papers that he wrote. It'll come to me in a minute. But they were in response to the Townsend Acts, which were some of the first draconian acts that Parliament passed against the colonies. And the last of the Townsend Acts was against New York, and it basically suspended the New York legislature to punish them for not complying. And Dickinson wrote a letter, and he basically talked about how, other colonies needed to propose resolutions and oppose these Townsend Acts. And at the end of this, he signed in Latin a phrase that basically means small things grow great with a cord. And basically all he was saying is that small things can grow into big things. And indeed, these small pushbacks against the Townsend Acts ultimately led to the Revolutionary War, which led to the United States of America. So small things do grow great by a cord. They grow together. And we can do that in local activism. You can do something, fight back against parking meters or I don't know what, whatever it is in your city or your county or your locality that you see that is an infringement on freedom. Fight back against those little small things. They will grow into bigger things. And, you never know, it's like surveillance. There may be a federal issue connected with that. I know like HUD and a lot of the environmental regulations and all of these weird Agenda 21 things that you see coming down out of city councils and county commissions, a lot of that comes from the federal government. So you can impact Washington, D.C. without having to have a good congressman or a good representative, which we know there's maybe like 2 of them in existence. Washington, D.C., it's so difficult to bring about change, but you can bring about change at your local level. You have much more to work with and much more power. So that's really what I want to encourage you guys with tonight. That's really the message that I want to leave with you. I want you to remember that some guy talked after Ron Paul and told me that I could do local activism. And then I want you guys to find local activism that you can get involved in. And we're developing a pretty cool tool at the 10th Amendment Center that can kind of help you along with this. We're calling it the Activism 101 podcast. And you can find that over at 10thamendmentcenter.com over in our blog section. And Dennis might be able to hook you up with that link. And this is a series of podcasts that I started when I started doing this activism. And each episode is maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes. And I take you step by step through the things that I've done as we've walked our way through this activism. So I talk about practical things like starting your website and writing a press release and holding an event and different things that have come up and different problems that we've encountered. I address those through this podcast. And as we continue through this effort, I'm going to continue adding episodes to the podcast. And our goal is by the time we get to the end of all of this and we win our lawsuit and we get the ordinance passed, we will have kind of an activism in a box that people can use to walk through local activism. So you can get started on that right now. I think there's like 21 or 22 episodes of practical, boots on the ground, nuts and bolts things that you can do for local activism. And my email is attached to those. If you guys are getting involved in something and you want advice or you want help, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Dennis knows how to get a hold of me. I'm more than happy to help with local activism efforts because I really think that that's where we're going to make a difference. I have very little faith that we're going to change Washington, D.C. I have a little bit of faith we might be able to change Lansing or Frankfort, Kentucky, but I know that we can do big things at the local level, and those will grow together and push their way up through the system, and eventually we can make those big changes by starting with little changes. So that's pretty much my spiel. I'd be happy to take some questions if that's technically feasible, or we can just say goodnight and you guys can eat pizza. So I'll turn it back over to my good friend Dennis. Well, do I see you there?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. But wasn't that great? How about a big round of applause for Mighty Mike Maharrey?
Dennis, I have one question.
Oh, well, let me just say, was it letters from a Pennsylvania farmer? Was it?
That's it.
Okay, letters from a Pennsylvania farmer. And Vince Clordy, our distinguished treasurer, has a question.
So, Mike, you mentioned license plate readers, which is always a thing that concerns me. The government knows where your car is. But I just heard on the news just some casual mention that in the Detroit area, they are rolling out facial recognition software use and cameras. And I wonder if you've heard anything about that, if that's a national campaign that's going on.
Yeah, it definitely is. The FBI rolled out a huge facial recognition database. I believe it was in 2016 is when they kind of took the cap off of that. So that's a goal of federal law enforcement is to create, they call it a biometric database. So it's not only facial recognition, they actually are doing things with voice recognition and DNA collection. So the idea is to create this huge database of easily making it easy to identify you. So when you start seeing that at the local level, that's definitely an area that you can push back against. And you may not be able to stop the license plate readers, but one of the things I think is the key is to make sure that any license plate data has to be destroyed within a short period of time if it's not being used in an active investigation, and that they have to get a warrant in order to preserve that data. And then to ensure that there's policies in place that the data is not shared outside of the agency. In other words, keep it from being dumped into these other larger databases. And there's several states that have proposed legislation on license plate readers that would do just that. So that has been out there. There is language out there that can address that. And if anybody's interested in seeing that language, they can get in touch with me through Dennis. I can get you model legislation for that.
Okay, that's great. Jim, did you have a question you'd like to ask? Jim Tokarski, come on down.
We call ourselves activists, and you suggest that one way of doing this is to use Twitter or Facebook or something, social media. But yet, I watch the news every day, especially recently, where they are beginning under pressure perhaps from the federal government, because they are in some way in cahoots with the federal government, of going after conservatives, going after people that they feel are outside their purview of where they should be. Is this really a good venue? I know Rush Limbaugh, I believe in his theory that social media is a sewer, And I don't have anything to do with it. He says he doesn't have anything to do with it, but yet you're suggesting being an activist, this is maybe a good way to do it. Is that really right?
It's certainly been effective for us. I mean, I've not had any problem with it. Now, I recognize that anything I put on social media is not private.
Exactly.
And there are venues to do private communication outside of social media, and we utilize those on things that are sensitive. But as far as actually reaching large numbers of people in terms of getting the message out, there's nothing better than social media right now. And I'm not afraid, I'm not hiding anything, I don't have anything, I'm not telling anything private, I'm simply saying, this is what the government's doing, these are our actions, this is what we're doing. Now, will they try to shut that down at some point? They might. I think at that point you're going to start to see other social media platforms evolve that maybe aren't Facebook. But the internet is, to me, you know, technology can be bad, technology can be good. But like I said, for me, it's been invaluable, and I've not had any trouble with it. And you know, what else are you going to do? You can't put flyers on telephone poles. I mean, nobody reads this. Nobody reads the paper. So this is the way that we can reach large numbers of people today.
Well, Mike, speaking of social media and getting information out, you were quite aggravated the other day regarding health insurance and Obamacare and the very misnamed Affordable Care Act. Would you like to share some thoughts about that with us and what you think? Again, I know the 10th Amendment Center has done a lot of great work regarding nullifying Obamacare. Your thoughts on that, sir?
Yeah, so we just found out that our health insurance premiums for the next year are going to go up to $1,000.90, which is a 65% increase. This is the health insurance that this year forced me to get new doctors. I know I was told that I would be able to keep my doctor. Apparently that was a lie, because I was not able to keep my doctor. And so, yeah, I said in the social media post, excuse my French, but I said affordable care my ass. It's absolutely certain. In fact, we can't afford $1,000 a month for health insurance. This is more than our mortgage. And not only that, it's not even good health insurance. And the sad thing is, for an individual, I'm self-employed, for a self-employed individual, this insurance company is the only option in this market for people who are in an individual pool. So I'm going to have to start looking at other options, and thankfully a lot of people have sent me some pretty cool stuff about some faith-based cost-sharing types of things. So there are some options out there. But we've got to get rid of this Obamacare. And it's pretty apparent that the Republicans aren't going to do it. We've had Obamacare repeal 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 so far. And none of those were actually a repeal. They were all just tinkering around the edges. So I continue to preach, and will continue to preach as long as I have breath, that we need to take action at the state level to undermine and undercut this Obamacare system. And I think you're going to see more and more people, as people like me, who are just middle-class folks, who are getting completely drowned and snowed under by this horrible system. I think you're going to start seeing the political will to start doing some things. One of my favorite things that's going on in a lot of states right now is what's called direct primary care. And these are, some people call them medical subscription period providers. Basically, you pay a set fee to your primary care physician every month, and then you have unlimited access to office visits, basic treatment, basic testing, and these doctors are able to secure amazing cost savings. If you guys are familiar with Tom Woods, he interviewed a direct primary care physician in Kansas about a year and a half ago, and the cost savings that this guy gets are just absolutely amazing. A number of states have passed laws over the last couple of years to facilitate these types of direct primary care agreements, particularly stipulating that they aren't insurance. And that's important because that takes them out of the regulatory system of insurance, and it makes it easier for doctors to incorporate it. So that's just one small step that can be taken at the state level. But we're going to need to see our state representatives, our state legislators, folks at the state and local level coming up with alternative healthcare delivery ideas so that we can just exit this federal system and let it fall in by itself, and so that we have options to secure good health care through the market. So what we need are things that stimulate the market, things like this direct primary care. The other thing that states can do, if they have the guts, is to quit cooperating with implementation of this horrible system. For instance, insurance is regulated at the state level through your state insurance commissioner. The state insurance commissioner is the person who enforces all of these Obamacare rules. If the state insurance commissioner was prohibited from enforcing the federal rules and only enforce state rules, then there would be nobody left to enforce the federal rules because the federal government doesn't have an insurance commission. So that's just one thing that we could do. But unfortunately, these people at the state level would prefer to sit around and complain about it than actually do something. And that's where folks like you come in. We've got to pressure our state representatives to implement these types of changes at the state level, undercut Obamacare, let it fall in on itself, and quit depending on Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and whoever else to actually fix the system, because it's not going to happen. So 10thamendmentcenter.com, if you look at our issues, you'll find Obamacare is one of the issues. We've kind of got a 4-step plan that we've developed at the state level that you can look at and address Obamacare that way. But this thing has got to go. It's killing your average middle-class American. It might be good for the really poor people, but in the process, it's making normal people really poor too. So, not a good plan.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mike, that was tremendous. I understand the pizza's showing up, and we love our pizza here. So we want everybody a big round of applause for Mike Maharrey. He does phenomenal. And we'll stay in touch, and we'll look at the videos you put up and read at the 10th Amendment Center, and we see you watching Lexington, how to do this local activism there, and also how to fight back against the misnamed Affordable Care Act, which is totally unaffordable. Enjoy the World Series, my friend, and we'll chat again soon. Thank you, Mike Maharrey. Okay, so.